Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone here. Good morning, everyone on camera. Thank you for joining. So I think we finished last week or 2 weeks ago the topic we were looking at. So I said we'd start something new. I think we've only got a couple of weeks till we stop for the end of term, and I take a little bit of a break over the winter holidays. So I thought I'd cover a couple of smaller issues. And a few people emailed me with suggestions of things to cover. When I say smaller issues, what I would like to look at is probably a pretty massive issue, but I think on that, in terms of the context of this year, I'll deal with more briefly. But equally, I did say that the floor would be open to those who are here live if anyone wants to nominate a subject particularly. Otherwise, I'll take something that someone emailed me virtually. No. Okay. So someone emailed me asking me to look at the question of why does the majority of the non-Jewish world exist, particularly in places that are isolated from the rest of the world, such as rural areas, large parts of China, Africa, and South America? Why are people created and no chance of anything other than pitiful, miserable existence, like natural poverty, like much of India, or oppression, large parts of the world born to be exploited and tortured and so on? Do they have an opportunity for Olam Haba? How do we understand the Poskin's Hillim that we say in Ashrei, Rachmov or Kol Masov, Hashem's mercy is on everyone? The animal kingdom is fundamentally cruel, with fights to dominance, etc. So these are powerful questions, big questions, and I think they deserve to be discussed. So I think there's two or three points over here which need looking at. The first is what exactly we mean by rachamim, what exactly we mean by mercy, and what we mean by this concept of Olam Chesed Yibana, which I often quote, in which we see the world as fundamentally an act of kindness, how we make sense of living in an unfair world, a world in which clearly there's a significant amount of inequality and injustice and suffering, how we make sense of it in our own personal lives when it occurs, and how we make sense of it in a broader sense, where we look at a world in which clearly there's 1 billion, 2 billion people living in very, very difficult conditions. How do we make sense of it in terms of physical existence, and how do we make sense of it in terms of spiritual existence? So in physical existence, what do we make of such suffering? And in spiritual existence, do these people really have a chance for any meaningful spiritual life? I think that's a summary of the question, and this is a topic that deserves looking at. So, small questions that need to be asked. Tzadik Geralo, yeah, Tzadik Geralo, really the question of Tzadik Geralo, a righteous person who suffers. And the less popular question, Rosh Hashanah, that bothers us a little less. Why should a wicked person prosper? Perhaps we ask it when it gets to extreme cases, but it doesn't bother us as
very difficult. It's something that's getting rid of his little things in this world, so there'll be nothing in the next. Yes. And the Russia is getting his rewards in this world.
Yes. So one of the answers given in the Gemara, as Avram is correctly saying, is that a tzaddik has suffering in order to get rid of his little misdeeds in this world, and a Russia gets rewards in order to get rid of their little good deeds in this world. So that the Russia is given their rewards in the physical world, so that when they enter the spiritual world, they are completely corrupted and ruined, and the tzaddik is given their suffering in this world, so that when they get to the spiritual world, they are completely cleansed of any suffering. This is one of the answers given in the Gemara. The ultimate conclusion of the Sugya, though, is that we don't really know the answer to the question. In other words, this answer is the Gemara is putting forward this answer. It's a partial answer, but the conclusion of the Gemara is we don't really know the answer to the question at all. Okay, so these are some of the subjects that needs addressing. Let's also put the question out in a fuller form according to the Rambam. Now, if we take the Rambam's Yud Gimel Ikrim on face value, then the Rambam says that anyone who doesn't believe all the 13 principles of faith has no possibility of spiritual life. We've looked at some of the Ikrim in this forum, in the Sunday morning forum. I looked at them at greater length a while back when on Wednesday nights, instead of Pasha, I was doing fundamentals of faith. But if we take the Rambam to be saying that there's no possibility of spiritual life, because in his understanding, each of the 13 principles is crucial to any spiritual existence, then the problem is yet worse. Because if we look at the Yud Gimel Ikrim, they include belief in monotheism, belief in one God. They include belief in Matan Torah, in Torah Sinai. They include belief in a God who is aware of human beings and our actions and gives rewards and punishments, a God who communicates with humans, prophecy, the Nevuah of Moshe, and finally, Olam Haba and Tchias HaMetim. So if you are a goat herd in Outer Mongolia, I don't even know enough about Outer Mongolia to know if they have goat herds, but if they have the equivalent profession, what I mean to say is someone who has a very short, difficult life without much transfer education or awareness of everything else going on in the world, and you try and be a good person, nonetheless, you never come across Jews or Jewish belief and end up unaware of Tchias HaMesim, then according to the Rambam, it would seem this person has no chelek in Olam Haba. Now, I say this somewhat tentatively because when we analysed, I think this bit we did look at in this forum, when we looked at the Yud Gimel Ikrim, it wasn't entirely clear if the Rambam in his Mishnah Torah meant to say that everyone has to believe these things, or it's only someone who denies these things who has a problem. Someone who is simply a Tinuk Shenishba. We discussed the concept of the Tinuk Shenishba. Someone who is unaware of these concepts completely and therefore isn't making a dogmatic or emphatic statement to the contrary, and simply has never really considered the possibility, maybe isn't included in a kofer, in a heretic according to the Rambam, and therefore could have a chelek in Olam Haba. On the other hand, the Rambam in his Peirush Mishnah seems to say a stronger form that one has to declare belief, one has to be confident in one's belief of these 13 principles. This is the way they catch them at the Siddur. Animamim v'emunah shlema sheh, ... all the 13 principles, faith, I believe with complete faith. So depending exactly how we understand the Rambam, we saw, I think, Rav Shlomo Goren's reading, Rav Kook's reading, Rav Soloveitchik's reading, Rav Amital's reading. We saw different readings as to whether the Rambam meant to say that this one needs emphatic belief, or it's enough merely not to comment on it in order to be considered a mamin. But certainly there's potential for greater questions in line with that. The Rambam in his Mishnah Torah, in Hilchos Melachim, when he talks about the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach, that a Gentile can achieve a chelek in Olam Haba if they believe in or keep rather the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach, the 7 Noachides laws. Now, it's often been pointed out that the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach include nothing really about belief. It's interesting, they're not a belief system at all. They're simply action. Don't murder, don't do avodah zarah, which has ramifications for belief, but isn't per se belief itself. Extreme cruelty to animals, immoral behavior, the laws of harayos, of sexual propriety, and so on. So the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach, dinim, having a system of justice and law, the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach are quite action-based. They don't really say anything about emunah or belief. Depending how you read the Girsa of the Rambam in his Mishnah Torah, but certainly according to the prevalent version, the Rambam adds in a belief element to it. And he says someone who keeps the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach just of their own volition is not mechasidei umas ha'olam, is neither from the pious of the umas ha'olam, nor mechachmei umas ha'olam, nor from the wise of the umas ha'olam. The reason why these Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach need to be kept is because of someone who is aware of Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah, and is keeping them because they're given to Moshe at Har Sinai. So Rambam here throws in one of the Ikrim, or several of the Ikrim actually in combination. And he says that the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach have to be kept because someone is submitting to the Jewish belief system. Someone is keeping them because of tzivoy, an instruction from HaKadosh Baruch Hu on Matan Torah. Keeping them merely because they seem reasonable and make sense isn't sufficient. So again, someone who grows up in a culture in which they are unaware of the Sheva Mitzvahs of Matan Torah or anything like that, but strives to live a life of decency and doesn't worship avodah zarah and doesn't commit immorality and lives a life of justice and so on, that will be insufficient for the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach according to the extant manuscript of the Rambam. This is difficult, not just because what does it do with all the people who haven't heard of Matan Torah. It's also difficult because the Rambam in his Moreh Nevuchim seems to put forward a viewpoint in which what really ultimately counts is my connection to transcendence, to spirituality, to values, to morality, to my understanding and relationship to Hashem. And Matan Torah is a means of revealing that to us human beings. But were someone to be capable of arriving at this insight without revelation, then good for them. They would have achieved everything that really matters in the Torah. The point that really matters in the Torah is that I am building a meaningful relationship with spirituality and morality and Hashem. Whether I am aware or not that Hashem happened to reveal this on Matan Torah wouldn't seem to be at the core of it. So there seems somewhat of a contradiction here. If we ask ourselves, according to the Rambam, who views ultimately revelation as rational, as being fit, as something that we humans can and should comprehend, why is it necessary for me to happen to know the fact of revelation? The point is that I'm doing everything that's demanded and understand everything that needs to be understood. So this remains a little bit of a stira or contradiction or a difficulty in the Rambam. Now, it is true that the Rambam agrees post Matan Torah. For us Jews, there is much that we do that we can never have worked out through reason. However clever you are, you'll never arrive at your own understanding of sharpness. Nor, to be honest, even a more understandable mitzvah like Pesach or Shabbos. We understand what Pesach and Shabbos are doing. They're trying to remind us of Ma'aseh Bereishis, Yitzias Mitzrayim, really important things. But again, we wouldn't have thought of every detail of the halachas. We wouldn't have arrived up by our own understanding. And nonetheless, we need to keep these. The answer is that is true. A system, a legal system needs to be created to give us a framework to arrive at the truths that matter. So what really matters is our relationship to Yitzias Mitzrayim. However, rules have to be put in place in order to create a chag, for example, a yom tov around that. Now, in essence, if I eat a little bit more than a kazayis matzah, a little bit less than a kazayis matzah, does it really make a difference to my relationship to the mitzvahs? No, it doesn't. Nonetheless, a legal system has to put a boundary somewhere. And now that we are commanded with this boundary, we have to keep it. Otherwise, we are ignoring halacha and rebelling against the mitzvahs that's commanded to us. In other words, the Rambam sees there's a sort of dual system going on over here. There's the inner content of the mitzvahs, which could be achieved even without diktuk halacha. Nonetheless, a system has to be set up which creates the rules of the nitty-gritty details of halacha. Once the system is put in place, if I ignore those rules, even though fundamentally, were I not to have this system, I would be able to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But now that the system is in place, I'm legally obliged to do it. Otherwise, I'm rebelling against Hashem, and therefore I have to keep it. So halacha in and of in itself is a means to an end, and it's not the ikka, it's not the fundamental. It's not what really matters ultimately. It really matters is my relationship to Hashem. Nonetheless, now that we've been given the mitzvahs, part of my relationship to Hashem is that of obedience, and therefore, if I ignore the mitzvahs, I'm not relating to Hashem, I'm not connecting. But that applies to us who are recipients of Torah. Were I not to be recipients of Torah because I would be unaware of it living in Outer Mongolia, or I'm not one of those who entered into the covenant of Sinai, in other words, to put that differently, I'm not a Jew, I am a Gentile, I'm a non-Jew, there doesn't seem ostensibly in the view of the Rambam to be a reason why I should need to keep these mitzvahs because of the instruction at Sinai. It should be enough that I'm connecting genuinely to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through another means. The Rambam in the end of Hilchos Avodah calls mitzvahs eitzos. He says they are a means, and eitzos literally means an advice. It doesn't mean to say they are advice in the sense that I can choose whether to opt in or opt out. It means they are advice in the sense that they are means to get to something deeper and more full than the mitzvahs themselves, which is the content they carry, how they mold me and carve me into a certain sort of person. And in principle, I could carve myself into that person without the legal or halachic system. Nonetheless, I have an obligation to obey halacha, to obey law, and therefore I can't disagree with that. I can't defy or ignore that system that's been created, that's been put in place. So the Rambam, when he says that the Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach have to be kept because of the commandment at Sinai, is a little bit difficult. Nonetheless, this is what the prevalent text of the Rambam says. There is an alternative girsa in the Rambam, which changes one letter, which changes the impact of this Rambam. In our version of the Rambam, printed Rambam, the Rambam says that someone who keeps the Sheva's mitzvahs b'nei Noach because of the command, not because of the commandment of Sinai, but just keeps it because of their own insight, is not mechasidea. He isn't from the Chasidei Umas Olam, v'lo mechachomer, and not from the wise ones of the Umas Olam. The word v'lo, Vav Lamed Aleph, if instead the case is Aleph Lamed Aleph, Ella, then it means but. And there is such a manuscript version of the Rambam, in which the Rambam says that such a person is lo mechasidei Umas Olam, they are not from the pious of the Umas Olam, Ella, but they are mechachomer, from the wise of the Umas Olam. And the Rambam holds wise people in esteem, right? Chacham is is what the Moan of Uchim really is trying to make us all into. We're all meant to be wise people. Speaks glowingly of the Chachamim. For example, in the Greek world, those of the Chachamim that arrived at a moral system in a relationship to Hashem, not all the Greek philosophers did, but those that arrived at such a system are considered remarkable people. So if the Gears in the Rambam, if the manuscript in the Rambam really reads that such a person is not mechasidei umasun, and they're not from a pious, but they are from chachomel, then maybe the Rambam is in accordance with his view in Moan Avachim, in which a chacham, someone who has a genuine philosophical and relationship to Hashem, is of course someone who is a ben olam haba, of course is someone who has a portion in the world to come. But this gets into questions, manuscripts of the Rambam and what the Rambam means, which is very difficult to know.
If you think of the sentence, below is Chassidei, below is it's mutar, it's no. But in the context of, because if you think somebody might actually get there by himself, he has to be pretty clever. Not,
yes.
It doesn't follow through context. That makes more sense.
It definitely is contextually an easier reading. It seems to fit more with the general view of the Rambam. It doesn't, even in this version, it doesn't completely resolve the issue because it's still unclear what the Rambam is coming to say. They're not from Chassidim, but they are from Chachamel. What is he saying over there? And in the context, it still remains very unclear. But let's say they do recognize Hashem, but they just don't know about Matan Torah. The Rambam does believe that. I mean, the Rambam thinks belief in God is important. There's no doubt. It's very in accordance with the Rambam's view in Moan Avachim to add in belief of God into the Sheva Mitzvahs. Because if you just read the Sheva Mitzvahs in Noach, you could say someone is completely blissfully unaware of God. That's enough. An atheist who doesn't do avodah zarah, doesn't murder, doesn't steal, etc. That's enough. It's very in line with the Rambam that he adds in belief of God into that and sees it as an akuna, something missing in the Sheva Mitzvahs. Doesn't know you have to believe in God. The difficulty is, why does it have to be the God who appeared at Sinai and gave us the mitzvahs? That's the difficulty. Why does this non-Jew who's trying to live a life of Sheva Mitzvah have to be doing it because of the Sinai covenant, the Sinai revelation? So if you change it to Elo Chachamel, and there is such a manuscript, you can look in the Frankel Rambam at the back, he brings such a Gersel, then it perhaps goes some way to resolve it. But it's still unclear a little bit what the Rambam is saying. I mean, isn't it good to be both a Chassid and a Chacham? I mean, why not be both? And what's wrong with the Chassidus of this person? If they are a chacham and they've arrived at the Sheva Mitzvahs within themselves, it maybe the Rambam understands Chassidus means being part of a covenantal relationship with Hashem. Doing mitzvahs just voluntarily because you've arrived at wisdom, nonetheless isn't a depth of commitment and relationship. And that depth of commitment and relationship can be only achieved through Matan Torah. Okay, this is a difficulty that remains in the view of the Rambam. It's part of a family of difficulties that remain as to exactly how to put the Rambam in Mishnah Torah and the Rambam in Moan Avachim together. But I mention this simply to say that if on face value, if we follow the consequences of the Ikrim and the Rambam's 13 principles of faith, and perhaps what he says in Mishnah Torah, it makes our question about our imaginary Mongolian goat herd even more difficult, because the poor fellow in his shepherding or goat herding time has reached significant conclusions on morality and decency and spirituality. Nonetheless, has no inner spiritual life because he's unaware, never met a Jew or even a Christian missionary to tell him about Matan Torah. So in the Rambam's formulation, we have a very serious problem. In the other Rishonim, I think the question which I read out at the beginning, which has a lot of emotional impact to it, which is what would be the point of these people's pitiful and miserable existence, according to the majority of thinkers in Judaism, who do not take the Rambam's very purist intellectual stance. And I'm talking about Rashi and Tosfos and Bali Tosfos and the Ramban and Rashba and the Ritva. When we learn through classic Jewish sources, the Kusari, when we learn through all these sources, the vast majority of them do not go with the Rambam's viewpoint around the Yud Gimel Ikrim, at least as a depth of philosophical understanding. We take on the Rambam's Yud Gimel Ikrim as the foundation of what it means to be a Jew. No doubt, to that extent, the Rambam has broadly speaking won. But the idea that you have to have a sort of very philosophical or profound relationship isn't mentioned. And the truth is, most Jews through the generations weren't philosophers. They believed in Hashem because they believed in Hashem, because that's what we do. They didn't necessarily understand it in any sort of profound philosophical way. And they just understood it because that's our Masorah, and that's what we're told, and we encountered Hashem at Sinai, and this is what we've heard from our family. And of course, Yesh Lem Chelek L'Mabah. Of course, this is enough to have Chelek L'Mabah. Similarly, when it comes to non-Jews, most of the Shodim don't act in this condition about belief in Hashem. They just say it's enough if you keep the Sheva Mitzvahs b'nei Noach, then Yesh Chilek Haba. So this definitely makes things easier for our Mongolian imaginary Mongolian goat herd, as long as he arrives or she arrives at some level of basic morality and keeps the Sheva Mitzvahs b'nei Noach, that would be enough. And there are serious Jewish thinkers who argue that every human being has an expectation to arrive at that level of insight. Everyone, if they looked honestly at the world, would arrive at a realization that we are created for a purpose and a meaning. This is something very integral to what it means to be a thinking or self-aware human being. Everyone should be aware that might isn't right. We can't just steal off others who are weaker and more vulnerable than us. And everyone also should be able to engage in a basic level of philosophy, in order to be able to look at the world and say, this is a wonderful, beautiful world. It must have been brought into existence by a greater power for a particular meaning. In other words, there's an expectation on all humans to arrive at a basic level of emunah and a basic level of relationship to Hashem. And this is put forward most strongly by in an essay by the famed Rebbe Zobin, in which he says, how can we demand of every 13-year-old bar mitzvah boy or 12-year-old bar mitzvah girl to have emunah when you see the greatest philosophers, Aristotle and Plato and Socrates, struggled with these things. And he says, look, you can struggle with these things all you want if you want to be sort of an overthinker. If you choose to be a philosopher with a sort of prejudice of an assumption that the human mind needs to be able to grasp everything and understand these philosophical ideas to their greatest depth. And don't forget, there's often bias that gets thrown into these things. There may well be reasons of convenience and expediency why it's simpler to sort of believe that we live in a world in which there isn't a creator. But if everyone goes in glut, everyone just goes in straight and simple, without overthinking the matter, without allowing bias of expediency to get in the way, that the intuitive position is you look at this world and you see a world that is beautiful and wonderful, and an argument for design, an argument to assume it was brought into being by a conscious creator. So writes Rebbe Zobin in his essay, in his famous Kuntras, on this subject. Rebbe Zobin, by the way, I should mention, if we're talking about people that go through fundamentally cruel experiences, I think I've mentioned his biography before. Of course, Rebbe Zobin, Hashem Yinakim Domo, was a victim in the Holocaust. He was in America when the war broke out, fundraising for his yeshiva, Baranovich. He was one of the premier Rosh yeshiva in East Europe before the war. Chose to go back to remain with his yeshiva through the difficult years of the war. He felt that he, as a captain of the ship, he couldn't desert it, and eventually, accompanied by his students, ended up being martyred in the Holocaust. We have a record from some of his students who survive about the very last talk he gave to his yeshiva boys before they were taken off to be martyred. By that stage, they knew what was happening with great clarity. I don't know if Rabbi Chana would have realized the full devastation of the Holocaust if he would have gone back or not. There's halakhic questions. I don't know, I'm simply saying I don't know what he knew at the time he made the decision to go back. Does one go back if one knows for sure one's going to be murdered? I mean, that's an interesting halakhic question, and not a clear-cut answer. But certainly he knew that he was going back to an awful situation. And right near the end of his time, they knew that they were going to be taken to be martyrs, and he gave a very famous talk at that point, in which he used a moshel which has since become very famous, in which he says that we humans only have a limited perspective on life. He says we look at, he says, imagine a person who's never seen a farmer in action, and sees the farmer taking his nice field, a nice bit of countryside, and is ploughing the field with blades. The farmer is ruining this pristine bit of nature and ploughing with blades and uprooting all the little weeds and plants that are growing in the field. And he screams at the farmer, "You vandal, what are you doing?" And then a bit later, the farmer makes things worse, because he takes grain, beautiful sacks of grain, and which look like vegetables that could be eaten, and he throws them into the ground. And he says to this farmer, what on earth are you doing? You're just wasting these sacks of grain and pouring them to waste in the mud and the earth. What's going on over there at all? And a few months later, he observes that out of the ground grows beautiful wheat plants, and says, "Oh, now I understand what you're doing. You're taking this field, and it has these beautiful rows of wheat growing from it." So he's happy with the farmer until he sees the farmer taking his combine harvester and cutting down, reaping all these wheat plants. And he says, "You crazy man, you've finally built a beautiful field full of life and you're now cutting the plants down. What on earth are you doing?" And then he watches the process and he sees that out of these plants, the farmer is extracting grain. He says, now I understand what you're doing. From these few sacks of grain that you put in the ground has emerged 300 sacks of grain. You're a wonderful man, Mr. Farmer. I understand what you're doing. And then the farmer takes the grain and he grinds it up into powder, into useless flour powder. And again, he despairs, why is the farmer ruining? Until the farmer obviously mixed the flour powder. Out of that emerges a beautiful loaf of bread. So Rabbi Chanan's point in this moshel, which was the last shmooze he gave to his boys, is that we have a very limited perspective on what goes on in the world. We don't really understand the full picture. We find ourselves like the farmer, like the observer, the ignorant observer who doesn't understand farming, who sees human beings being plowed, sees human beings being threshed and being harvested and cut down, sees human beings being ground down to flour, to dust, and doesn't realize that out of all of this can emerge something beautiful, the loaf of bread. And this was Rabbi Chanan's final shmooze to the yeshiva boys before they went off and were martyred of Kiddush Hashem, making the bracha on the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem. So this is a very, very moving and painful episode in our history, and one that's documented. We have this record of his speech. We have the essay he wrote about Emunah, and presents us with two pictures of answers to or non-answers, or what we can say around this subject in the thinking of Rabbi Chanan Wasserman. I'm not saying this is the only way to view it. We'll look at more Maimonidean approaches to the matter shortly, but these are important approaches, and again, probably represent the majority position in Jewish thought. The first point is Rabbi Chanan's point that as much as we love Moed Nevuchim, as much as we enjoy philosophizing, as much as it's important for all of us to think, let's not overcomplicate the matter either. In essence, Emunah and the Shavuot Mitzvahs Minonach at least are basic things which every human should be and is expected to arrive at from their own conclusion. Not all of us can be great philosophers, but therein lies our advantage. Aristotle and Plato can overcomplicate what ultimately is a simple thing. And we have a right to demand of all human beings, if we remove our bias and our, the natural temptation perhaps to live in a carefree world and accept that we live in a world in which there's a Borei Olam, there is a Metzaver, a commander. We should arrive at belief. This is point number one. And in that sense, he's giving an answer to these painful questions that I was asked about the bitterness of existence, life of the majority of the Gentile world and rural areas and so on. And the second point he's giving is an argument for modesty, which again is an eminently reasonable argument. I don't think in a modest form anyone can argue on either of Rabbi Chanan's points. We'll look at them in more detail in a few moments and see to what degree we can take them. But certainly the idea that we humans have a very limited perspective on life and don't really understand the bigger picture is ultimately true. We only have a limited perspective of understanding and insight, and we can't know the full truth. We can't know everything that is. And it's legitimate for Rabbi Chanan Wasserman to say that we don't know the full picture. Don't forget, we as Marminim believe we live in a world in which there's an Olam Hazeh and an Olam Haba, and the true worth of a human is the inner human and what the human has achieved and what the human does. The true worth of the human is not their external life. And maybe there are people that go through a very bitter and pitiful existence in this world, but emerge polished from that, and emerge, refined by that, and their chelek and Olam Haba is accordingly significant. Other mentions the Gemara that speaks about Tzaddik Viralo, the righteous suffering, and perhaps suffering extraordinarily in order to remove the little flaws that remain. This understanding of what the answer is saying, this isn't just needless suffering to burn away flaws. We don't believe in needless suffering ever in Yiddishkeit. This is challenges and difficulties and turmoil in order to give the tzaddik the opportunity to revisit their failures and correct them. The reality is, in human nature, unfortunately, we very often only stop to appreciate that which we have when it is taken away from us. When we are when we are coasting along with everything going easily, we often don't stop and appreciate how lucky we are and how grateful we are. I was involved a while back in counselling a couple whose shalom bayis was very, very poor and really struggling. And at one point, his wife, the wife of the man I was speaking to, was diagnosed with what appeared to be quite a significant health problem, and obviously, and understanding this husband was completely devastated, and the whole tone of the conversation changed. Now talking about how wonderful his wife was and how much he appreciated her, and the thought of chas v'sholom, her life being impacted or losing her was quite astounding. A couple of months later, it turns out the diagnosis was not anywhere near as bad as had originally been thought, and actually it turned out to be a fairly mild ailment, which was being dealt with, and the conversation reverted back to the previous sort of tone. And I said to this person, "Can you not remember what you were saying to me a couple of months ago?" And to give him credit, he said, "Yes, he does actually. You know, he sort of finally hears the point." But it's just a very vivid example of. I share a story about someone else, but the truth is, I'm sharing a story about myself and all of us here, right? This is no, we're all like this. We all know this. We very, very rarely stop and properly appreciate others in our lives, or even things that we take for granted in ourselves until they're under threat, whether it's in terms of livelihoods or in terms of our own health. None of us really stop to think about the 24/7 working of our kidney, our lungs, our hearts, our livers. We don't, our spleens. We don't even know much about these parts of our body, and we suddenly become medical experts. Rahman al-Son. I mean, never tragically when these things are under threat. So this is the first point. I mean, suffering often actually focuses the mind and causes us to think more deeply about where we are heading and what our priorities are. Very often, it's only when they are under threat that we think profoundly and properly about things. Similarly, and related to that, suffering makes us relook at our values and whether we haven't become a little bit smug or a little bit uncaring or a little bit callous or a little bit lacking generosity or forgiveness. I'm not making a political point when I say the following, that there's a part of us instinctively that believes in enterprise and self-responsibility and taking ownership of one's problems and so on. There can be a part of us that looks at people going through a difficult time and thinks, well, can't they pull themselves out of this? Can't they sort it out? Sometimes people going through a difficult time are so caught up in their problems they're unable to act reasonably. And there can be a part of us which is a little bit unsympathetic to that, and sort of and when we go through a difficult time, perhaps we realise how astoundingly hard this is, and how vulnerable one feels when one's suffering in physical, mental health, or financial challenges, or whatever it may be. And again, this is what the Gemara means when it talks about the righteous having suffering, which removes the flaws that remain. They're given a wake-up call. If you coast along in life, you may not have that spur and that prompt that reminds you, am I really so good? Am I really doing what I need to do? I'm just sort of drifting along in life because everything is going smoothly. And when something problematic happens, maybe it causes me to stop and reflect and rethink what my real values are. And this is the sort of idea that Rabbi Hanan was reflecting in his shmooze. At the end of the day, we don't get to see the loaf of bread. We don't get to see the final stage in the farming process until Olam Haba, until we see the end result, when the externals of a human being is stripped away, and it's only the inner core of what the person is that remains. So this is sort of one approach to the subject. I'm just seeing here that a couple of things have been posted. This is one approach to the subject. Because someone who has posted, given the very secular and godless society that we all live in, is there concept of Nishma for a non-Jew? A non-Jew is a very moral person, is an atheist or possibly agnostic, has no place in the world. Have they no place in the world to come? And then the Gemara view of tzaddikim having bad things in their lives to purify themselves, which logically mean that one should welcome suffering and be upset not to have suffering. Okay, so two good points. The first point is in terms of, maybe this was posted before I mentioned it, but yes, I mean, it could well be that the concept of Sinuk Shanishva applies to our Mongolian goat herd, and equally applies to someone living in the West who perhaps has never seriously taken the possibility of God seriously. And we did discuss this a little bit when we spoke about Sinuk Shanishva in the context of the Yud Gimel Ikrim and those who aren't Maminim, even amongst Jews, because perhaps they grew up in a cultural environment where they never considered the possibility. The whole God theory just sounded weird and bizarre and nonsensical. The Gemara reveals tzaddikim having bad things in their life to purify themselves. Would this mean that we should welcome suffering and be upset not to have suffering? I guess I guess the answer is yes to a degree, but which of us has no suffering? I mean, which of us have no suffering? Suffering doesn't have to be massive. If we wake up, then we can hear it even in minimal suffering. We all confront limitations in our lives. There's always scenarios in which we bounce up against a wall. We don't have everything that we want. We can use that as our suffering. We can use that as a way of reminding ourselves of the truth. It is a pity that we only appreciate our health when our health is threatened. So let's take the Gemara on board and appreciate our health when our health isn't threatened. It's a pity we only appreciate the valuable and precious people we have in our lives when that's threatened. So let's have that heightened appreciation even when it's not. So I think there's elements of suffering that we all experience which we can extrapolate from if we use wisely, and chas v'shalom that any of us should have more suffering than that. The point of the Gemara is when we experience suffering, it gives us a positive that we can draw out of it. Okay, so this is yes.
Just accepting this, they are not going to complicate life. Just coming from a man who probably spent most of his life trying to complicate the most simple in the most complicated way possible.
Okay, so Rabbi Zobin is not saying don't overcomplicate it life. He's just saying if you are minded to think, and he was a thinker, if you are minded to think, don't lose sight of the wood from the trees. Don't forget the basic values also. He's simply arguing that if we look at the world in a clean and simple sense, without prejudice and without overcomplicating things, the basic idea that we have meaning, we have purpose, we have direction, there's morality that we need to do, and that we live in a world which has been brought into being by a force beyond itself, shouldn't be seen as overcomplicated. Rabbi Zobin is not an anti-philosopher. I've spoken before about anti-philosophical trends in Jewish thought. Rabbi Zobin is an anti-philosopher. Rabbi Zobin is more of a skeptic about philosophy, meaning to say he recognizes there are people who need to do philosophy and do philosophy well. He's just saying, when you do it, have a sense of modesty, realize that it's very limited what you can see. Remember my farmer mashal, and don't let your philosophy lead you to forget the premises which should be intuitive for all human beings. He's not in history a representative of an anti-philosophical thought like Rabbi Zobin. He's representative of a skepticism around philosophy, meaning how far can it really take you, and how honest is it really when we pursue it? So it's a different thing. So he's not averse to deep thought. If you ask Rabbi Zobin, should people learn the first chapter of Chovos HaLevavos, the first shah, the first gate of Chovos HaLevavos, speaks about philosophical beliefs of God. Should people learn Mo'en Avuchim? His probable answer would be only a few. That would be his answer. His answer wouldn't be no one should learn it. His answer would be a few people should learn it, but most people don't need it in their lives and shouldn't engage in it and be too much for them, and it would just confuse them. That's a very different answer to a sort of fundamental philosophical critique of the very concept of philosophy, like, let's say, Nachman of Breslov engaged in. Rabbi Zobin here is representing probably a very large part of the yeshivish sort of worldview, and it's not a coincidence he's representing it, because he's one of really the architects of that worldview. He's a representative of that sort of hashkafa. So if you open a newly published volume of Chovos HaLevavos, for example, so Chovos HaLevavos has a number of sha'arim. Chovos HaLevavos is duties of the heart, written by Rabbeinu Bachya in Spain in the 1100s or so. It consists of a number of sha'arim, a number of gates. Most of the gates deal with matters of the heart, bitachon, trust in Hashem, another, modesty, and the like. The first of the gates is a philosophical treatise, a series of chapters in which he engages in what's called chakira, philosophical investigation of belief. So if you read the Hakdama in newly printed editions, it will say most people shouldn't learn this, skip straight to Shah base, skip straight to Shah base. I don't think that's an unfair thing to say. I think that's a reasonable and legitimate point to make. I think there's good grounds to argue that, other than the Rambam, most Jewish thinkers would subscribe to a view roughly analogous to that, which is, if you need philosophy, do it. If you don't need it and you're not bothered by any of these questions, don't. Even the Rambam, by the way, entitled his work, Mo'en Avuchim, the Guide to the Perplexed. If you're not perplexed, then don't read the Guide to the Perplexed. It's not for you. The Rambam in his Hakdama writes very clearly, who am I writing my work for? I'm writing it for those who are perplexed. In what way are they perplexed? To put it in modern terms, those who are torn between their Judaism and their Greek identity. They've learned and studied and seen the wonders of science and philosophy. They've learned and studied Judaism, and that's very important to them, and they don't know how to put the two together. The reason I speak a lot about Mo Nevuchim is because, to a degree, I think all of us are that. In the modern era, all of us are torn between these two worlds and worry about it to some degree or other. And therefore, the Noachides is an important tool for us to engage in. But if you're genuinely not, then good luck. Fine. If there's no, I don't think there's a particular mitzvah to deal with that. Finally, I had a question. Also, there's clearly a view amongst certain sections of Jewry. The non-Jews don't have a place in the world to come, hence they're treated by some as less than human. Does this Kabbalistic question mark view have legitimacy? It wasn't something I was going to address in this share, but I guess it ties in enough that I should say just very briefly a few points about this, and maybe with that I'll conclude for today. And next week we will look at the alternatives to Rabbi Chonon's approach. But I think Rabbi Chonon Wasserman's approach definitely should be the starting one that we mention. Is it true that non-Jews and non-from Jews don't have a place to the world to come? Well, it's certainly true that some don't. As it is, for that matter, it's true that certain from Jews, so-called from Jews, also don't have a place, presumably, in the world to come. All humans have better and worse individuals amongst them, and I assume that any segment of society has some people who have a chelik and some people who don't. The Mishnah tells us that Kol Yisrael yesh lahem chelik v'namar, other than those that have lost the Shem Yisrael, and it's perfectly reasonable to assume that some people have lost the Shem Yisrael. How does that mean that we relate to non-Jews and non-from Jews in terms of their spiritual lives? I don't think we have to come to any conclusions around the matter. I think we can leave those questions to HaKadosh Baruch Hu to determine the worth of every individual. The Rambam in Hilchos Teshuvah, Perek Gimel, says that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the Kel Deus. Hashem is the one who knows the minds of human beings. We humans have no way of knowing the minds of human beings. And the examples he gives of this concept of the greatest of the great. We have stories in the Gemara in which the Medrash tells us when Shmuel was summoned by Shaul. In the mystical story of the witch of Ein Dor, we're not going to go into that story. Shmuel thought he was being summoned for the Yom Adin HaGadol, for the great day of justice, and he was terrified. That means even Shmuel, who is canonized with a book in Tanakh, ultimately he didn't know, and we don't know exactly his status in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we humans definitely can't comment on individuals. What are the principles or the sort of algorithms at work? Well, in a sense, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the concept of Tinuk Shenishba. We're talking about to what degree every human has the possibility and accessibility to true spirituality. It's interesting that perhaps the Rambam would be the harshest in this sense, because the Rambam is the figure in Jewish history everyone chooses what they like and don't like about the Rambam. There's no doubt that the Rambam, the same Rambam who wrote the Mo Nevuchim, also is the figure in Jewish thought who comes the closest to thinking we have answers around the principles of who has a chelek and olam haba or not. The Rambam modifies it by saying only the Chaldeans ultimately can make that judgment, because everyone goes through their own life circumstances and stories. So the question is one that, in a sense, is what we're exploring over here as to what the parameters are. Does that mean that people should be treated less than humans? And is this a Kabbalistic view that has some legitimacy? No, a human is a human. There may be trends of thought within Kabbalah of talking about existential or fundamental differences between Jew and Gentile. And the Rambam may have had a different perspective on that, in which he saw these as not existential or intrinsic, but as functional. We're lucky enough to have the Torah, and others don't have the Torah, and so on and so forth. No one, chas v'shalom, would take that to a conclusion that people are less than human. What does that mean? I mean, a human is a human. The Mishnah and others says, Choviv Adam Shenifa B'Tzelem, precious is a human being. All human beings that are created in Tzelem Elokim, every single human being is created in Tzelem Elokim. Chiba Yaseu and Adaslo. The great love that we have of Jews is that we've told about it, that we know about it. Halavai, if only every human would know that we are created for Tzelem Elokim, but every human being is created for Tzelem Elokim. So however one understands mystical texts that talk about existential differences, none of them can possibly take away from what is a posuk at the beginning of Bereshis and a mission in Birkei Avos that every human being is created for Tzelem Elokim. And this perhaps is one of the examples of why Kabbalah needs to be learned with care. If one misunderstands the Kabbalistic ideas and thinks that it's saying something contradictory to that, then that's a terrible travesty of what's owed to and the respect that we deserve to give to every human being. Leonard, sorry, are you waiting to ask something or not? Okay. Yeah. Oh, the Iplug Messiah, yeah, yeah.
He mentions that you understand what's going to happen.
Yes.
It's exciting,
Yeah.
but it's,
So for those online, Leonard is sharing with us Rabbi Wasserman's text in which he speaks about the time of Mashiach, which is also a very difficult text and represents only one school of thought, but again, a very important and classic work. Okay, so we'll stop here for today. I wish everyone a good morning. Thank you so much for joining. And next week, we will solve all these problems. We will finally know the purpose and meaning of existence and of all human beings. So, Halavai, that's our program for next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.